Back, we're in section 4.3 and we're doing example 3. Not a lot of students' favorite things to do. It's the rare student that appreciates having to do proofs, and I'm included in that. I understand the challenge of having to think through and using logic to go step by step in my progression. I really do get that, but it is laborious and sometimes you just don't even know where to start. And I totally am with you if that's you. So hang in there, hang with me, and let's see if we can figure this out together. So what we need to do is create a statement column and then a reason column. Okay? That's pretty normal. If we write a statement, we have to have a reason for writing it. That reason could be, hey, it was given, or I have a theorem that proves this, or a definition, or a corollary. And that's what we've been writing down in your electronic notebook, or if you've been using note cards or both. Now, look at what we've been given. Angle P and angle M are right angles. That's the first thing. Second thing, R is the midpoint of segment PM. And then the third thing, segment PQ is congruent to segment MN. Segment QR is congruent to segment NR. Okay, we are supposed to prove that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle MNR. Now remember, some of you are wrapped up, you're like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to lay this out. I don't know what to do. Think about what we did in example 1, okay? They gave us 2 congruent triangles and said, okay, based on the order, let's identify congruent angles and congruent sides. That's what we're doing in reverse. We don't know that these triangles are congruent because that's what we're trying to prove. So we've got to go back and prove that the angles are congruent and the sides are congruent. And we've got to go back and prove that. Some of that's in our given and some of it is not. Okay, and we're going to find another way to prove that. Okay, let's start with the angles. Those tend to be pretty easy. And let's see if we can kind of map this out a little bit. The first thing I would write down, the only thing that's given about angles is the first statement, angle P and angle M are right angles. Okay, and you can put that down as given. Okay, now we want to show that angle P is congruent to angle M. And we have to think of a reason why. And it's really simplistic. I don't know if you remember writing down the right angle congruent theorem. I don't know if you remember writing that down. I will have to try and track that down, figure out what page that was on. But it's just a real basic theorem that says 2 right angles always equal each other. If 2 right angles are congruent, then they're equal. If they're equal, they're congruent. Okay? And so if we know they're right angles, then we have to know that they're congruent is the point. Okay? So that's, I'm going to put kind of a little dot here to show that I dealt with those angles. Okay? Now, the second set of angles I want to target is right here. Look at these 2 angles. Okay? We can say that angle PRQ is congruent to angle MRN. And there's a really good reason. This is something we learned a while back. I even want to say it was chapter 1. And did you notice that they are vertical angles? This is the vertical angles theorem that says that they have to be equal to each other. So I'm going to put a little dot here, okay, here and here. Okay, so we've dealt with those 2 angles. Now remember, Let's write out these last angles. PQR is congruent to angle MNR. And we just learned this one really recently. Think back to where we were talking about if you have two angles of one triangle that are congruent to two angles of the second triangle, what's true about the third angle? They're also congruent. That's right. So remember, we called that the third angles theorem, I guess. Okay. And so we can put a little, maybe we can put like 2 arcs there to show that that's true. And we'll put a little dot here and here. Okay. Now what you just did in this first part is you just proved that the angles are congruent. That's what you did in the first part. We're off to a great start. Okay. So all we have to do now is finish it up and prove that all the sides are congruent. Okay, so that's really all we have to do, and some of that was given. So this might be a really good time to put some other information here that's on there. Well, the second one listed is this one. R is the midpoint of segment PM. And so we know we can write that because that's given. Okay. Now, why is that significant? Why is that significant precisely? I mean, don't leave this point just yet. Don't just write it down as being given and go, okay, I wrote it down, it's given, I'm done. You know, what's significant? Let me erase the triangle here and let's look at it. R is the midpoint. What does a midpoint do to a segment? That's right. It splits it into 2 equal pieces. So can we say now that PR is congruent to MR? Notice the order of the letters that I put them in, okay? I started at the right angle and went to the center, okay? So why can I write that? Is there something, a definition that we learned? Yeah, this is definition of a midpoint. A midpoint is going to split a segment, any segment, into 2 equal pieces, making those pieces congruent. And so that's the definition of a midpoint. Okay, so you just proved in 2 steps the missing sides that we were needing. Okay, and then we already know about the other sides, those are given, so we can write down PQ is congruent to MN, and QR is congruent to segment NR. And we can write down, well, that was given originally. Okay, so what you did in this part of the problem was you proved the sides are all congruent. Once you do and prove that the angles are congruent and then you prove that the sides are congruent, you can now say triangle PQR is congruent to triangle MNR. And your reasoning is this. Definition of congruent triangles. That's why you can say that. You prove that the triangles were congruent. By definition, triangles are congruent if their angles are congruent and their sides are congruent. And that's why you can say that. So hopefully I've taken some of the mystery out of doing this particular type of proof. Sometimes students are like, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to get this going. So if you kind of look at your destination, what am I trying to get to? Oh, I'm trying to prove triangles are congruent. Okay, well then that means I have to prove that their sides are congruent and their angles are congruent. I could have started with the sides. I did not have to start with angles, I could have started with R as the midpoint of PM. I could have started that and let that be my step one and done the sides first and then done the angles. So there's a little bit of flexibility as long as I can track what you're doing and what you're doing makes sense, then, and it's obviously logical, then it is acceptable. Okay, let me see what's on this next page. Nope. All right, so that's it for example 3. We do need to practice this in class, so come ready to stretch your brain. And I'm sorry in advance. I know some of you probably won't like this, but it's a really good exercise in logic. And that's something we all need, I think. All right, thanks for listening.